كلام في التصميم هو بودكاست من تقديم ليوان يستكشف مواضيع التصميم المعاصر في الشرق الأوسط وخارجه، ويربط أصوات المصممين المبدعين المحليين مع العالميين لتشجيع التعاون ومناقشة الأمور الإبداعية والثقافية والفكرية.
Talks on Design podcast by Liwan explores contemporary design themes across the Middle East and beyond. Featuring pioneering Qatari creatives, the podcast connects local and global design voices and encourages collaboration and commentary on creative, cultural, and intellectual matters.
مرحبا غيث، مرحبا جاد.
Hello Fatima.
Hello, Fatma, keep it
Going.
Alhamdulillah. Okay. So maybe we start by saying a little bit about ourselves, right? I'm Fatma Sahlawi, practicing architect here in Doha, Qatar. I studied architecture, I studied urban design, and ever since, at the American University of Sharjah and UCL in London, and ever since I've been here in Doha practicing both architecture at a studio I co-founded with my partner Nasser Al-Amadi, Studio Amara, running a bookstore with my sister who co-founded it with me, Rima Sahlawi, known as Atlas Bookstore. And I also had a project at Qatar Museums called the Qatar Blueprint, which is really, in essence, looking at activating the different municipalities of Qatar through the different existing industries in all of those different municipalities.
Very nice. I'm Ghaith Abi Ghanem, and Jad, my partner. We're Ghaith&Jad, and we also graduated from the American University of Beirut. And we've been pursuing our career. We co-founded our studio back in 2013. And we experimented a lot in different mediums, whether it's architecture, space design, and even object or collectible object design. And all of this happened also through creating our studio in a place where we encouraged co-working environments and like inhabiting the city. We were very persistent on staying in Beirut and trying as much as possible to work on projects in different areas around the world, but sticking into being relevant and working in the city. Recently, in the last 2 years, when the situation in the country started being very difficult for everyone, we shifted a bit our studio in between two places. I am based in Berlin now, and Jad's based in Paris, and we try as much as possible to come to Beirut as often as we can. To pursue our work, which is mainly covering at this point scenography. We deal with cultural institutions, and we also have some private projects that are related to interior and object design. Okay.
So I guess Ghaith, you did that for yourself and Jad, right?
Exactly.
I think so. I mean, we're used to one of us doing it for both of us. But Jad, you can add anything, like if I missed something.
No, I am Jad Milki, and yes, Ghaith and I started our studio really directly after graduating, and that was a very interesting period for us because we wanted to challenge a bit the commercial aspect of architecture inside the city. Our main work our main collaboration started when during our university years we interned together at Herzog de Meuron in Switzerland, in Basel. And one thing that's funny, which we were talking about the other day, Ghaith and I, is that one of the first projects that we collaborated in our internship was really about archiving. And during our stay at Herzog de Meuron, we worked on a full series of visuals that explain all the competitions that architecture studio went through. So all of their competitions, all of their competition entries, how they dealt with the different projects they had, whether it was new projects, renovation projects, and they have a lot to do with heritage buildings that were turned into museum spaces, cultural spaces, and our first dabbling in archiving and architecture was during that internship, where we went into all of their archives and looked at hand drawings, hand sculpted models of Tate Modern, for example, which was a small cubic wood model that had like writings on it, and like these old elements that they already had from their projects that we went through and we documented through photography, through different scans. And there was the idea of how to take all of this content and present it to the entire office at that time. But somehow, with all our conversations leading up to this talk, we remembered this part of our journey, which really was the start and the base of sonography and dealing with archives.
Jad, that's such an interesting coincidence, because when I was thinking about, the topic of this talk and what we would be discussing, and sort of archival buildings that I keep sort of going back to and thinking about, whether it's locally in Qatar, regionally, but then globally. When I came to think about global examples, it was the cabinet of Herzog and de Meuron, and it's truly, I know maybe just the sections I've been to were really focusing on archiving all the physical models that the office has made over the years for different projects. But it really sort of not only tells you a lot about the office, but also tells you a lot about different places in the world and different cities in the world, just through physical models, right? And just through the way they've been displayed. It's actually an office I didn't work in as you did, but we worked with on the Lusail Museum that is soon groundbreaking here in Qatar, but has been going through a design process, a very lengthy design process since 2008. And my first time there was around 2010. And that is one thing, other than, of course, the great architecture of the office, but that is one thing I recall very well about this office. It's the act of archiving even before the building being built, or even before, the project being completed, just the importance of archiving from the very beginning of the design process.
Yes, and the cabinet is actually what we worked on. It was before it was the cabinet, it was just the storage space that they had with so it was like, really, how can they start showing this archive to different to the public and to the people that come into the office, because you have a constant movement of people going in and out of the company. So it was interesting to see the process of each project. And this is something that we actually adopted later on when we started our own studio. We realized that model making and creating physical objects from ideas was something that really took our process from what we expect to what we wouldn't expect to design at the end.
Yeah, it's like something, we made something visible. Somehow you can have many ideas or thoughts, but when they are manifested in an object, they stay and they have like a projection somehow to what's going to happen next. This Herzog and de Meuron experience really influenced us, but it was a mega office. So there was like around 300 people working on this. That's when we visited the studio of Peter Zumthor, because we had a friend working there. That's when we realized exactly how we would like to function, because it was only around 15 people back then. And they were also depending a lot on model making and the sensitivity of everything being laid on front of you. So Yajad and I, we came back to Lebanon and we're like, we would use model making and drawing as the main medium, how we even present our projects to the clients, and kind of depart away from the regular procedure of doing CAD drawings, presentations, and 3D renders. This would come later when it's like technical or something detailed we need to figure out. But initially, when we're thinking of a project or coming up with the main base, it's all going through that method.
I guess, Fatma, while we were collecting models, you were collecting books.
Yes, like actually after the situation now and the explosion that happened 3 years ago, Mansion was heavily, we'll go to Mansion a bit later, but our studio mainly was damaged in a major way. So we had to evacuate and fix it ourselves. And that's when we packaged all the models that we've worked on since 2013. And it was a very interesting exercise because you suddenly go and revisit all of them and kind of package each theme, each project, each unit in a way. And now I have them all stored. They're in the dark, unfortunately, but soon we will re-unpack them and see how to also kind of build on them and have them accessible to us, to people we work with, and also work on more pieces in the future.
No, but Ghaith, that's very important because I came to really understand the importance of archiving specifically, architecture, architectural models, architectural proposals, entries to competitions, etc. When I was asked to work on an exhibition called Making Doha, it was to open together with the National Museum of Qatar. It took place at the National Museum of Qatar. It was a temporary exhibition for 6 months. And I co-curated it with OMA, with Remkula Samir Bantal specifically. And we were asked to work on this exhibition only sort of 3.5 months before the opening of the museum. That's how little time we had. And there was an expectation that, from the commissioner, that we're asking you to work on an exhibition that would put on display the evolution of the city of Doha. And yeah, there was an expectation that this material sort of existed, right? Whether it was imagery, models, films, videos, any type of letters, collateral, any types of sort of visual communication to narrate the story of the evolution of the city. But we very quickly in the very first week realized that we had no source for the material that would go into this exhibition and that would be displayed in it. And we very quickly realized that, the main outcome of this exercise should not just be an exhibition, but should be the beginning of an archive. And we literally had to go to every, institution. And the timeline that we were looking at was really 1950 onwards. So the first year after the first export of oil onwards, and first of export of oil from Qatar onwards. And so we went to every single institution that was founded since then, any sort of private sector, sort of maybe families that worked in construction, had contracting companies, etc., and really tried to find as many blueprints as we could, as many models as we could. Images went to, the national newspapers of Qatar, the national television. And we realized the importance of starting an archive of some sort to document, and not only document, but sort of preserve content and preserve material that people after us also would be able to use and would be able to put together to tell the story further, or say, or tell a different sort of angle of the story of the evolution of the city. And it was just, I guess it was also the notion of Qatar going through this sort of very rapid pace of development over the past few decades, that, people are always running to develop and complete and deliver projects where there's very little time to spend on documenting and archiving. That was one thing, but also I think it was the sort of lack of acknowledging the importance of an archive and of documentation. But very interesting finds, even in this sort of very haphazard way. We were looking for material. There was an abandoned porta-cabin very close to the Doha Corniche, where we found a beautifully crafted wooden model of a National Library proposal that was never realized by Arata Isozaki. And it was right there with a beam of light sort of coming through the corrugated top of the porta-cabin on it when I found it covered in dust. And it was just, it was just a moment of appreciation that some have not stored it properly, but at least, they kept it. It's there, and now it's been conserved and and stored. It was shown in the exhibition, but now it's stored properly. So just this sort of, moments of realizing importance of archives. And that takes me back to, again, Lusail Museum with Herzog and de Meuron. We've so far had a few exhibitions showcasing what the museum is going to be about in terms of its collection, the architecture, etc. And every time we tend to go back to this cabinet and pull out the content there and just show it in a different way. And it's just already shown in so much depth and so much richness to the material because of how much was kept and stored. And a lot of people call it hoarding, but really if it's organized hoarding, then it's, it's archiving and it's very useful and systematic.
Definitely. It can also contribute with universities for students. It can become a knowledge production place in itself, as you said, when it's extensively done. And when you spoke about Qatar and like documenting how it grew with time, which is very important in the history of the nation, here in Lebanon, like we also document destruction. Beirut is so famous for being always kind of collapsing and getting back together. So I also find it very interesting because I remembered a project Jad and I did for a modern building that dated back to the 60s. It was facing the house of our friend, who was also an architect designer. And that building was going to be demolished. They took the decision to demolish it because in Lebanon, unfortunately, modernist periods like architecture isn't really still considered a heritage site. And that's why I really appreciate the work of the Arab Center of Architecture by George Arbid, where it suddenly archives as well this kind of era to allow people to understand that this is also part of our heritage and that's something we should learn about. And the buildings are really well made that they can stand till many years ahead and can be activated in a beautiful way. So that at that point when the building was destructed, we decided to document its death. So we took cameras and we recorded the whole destruction of the building floor by floor. And we also recorded the sound of the machines because each way of breaking a slab or a column or a wall has a separate sound. So the frequency starts basically uncovering the process of its death. And at the end, we took all this recording, we transcribed it into kind of like wave signal like this. Yeah, and that was the story of the building. We printed out a big drawing. We put all the sonic vibration sounds on top of it and the video on the back to kind of highlight this tragedy and like seeing it unfold in front of us for a random commercial building to come replace it, which would, of course, would be insensitive to anything in the urban fabric around it. So yeah, this just came to my mind now when we're talking about Beirut, because yeah, archiving can be keeping kind of evidence of anything, whether it's building or whether it's unbuilding somehow. And that's when we actually moved to Mansion and made our studio in such an old house. That was the start of archiving while living also as well in it.
But one thing about the city that you were mentioning is the lack of archive. A beautiful thing that we do at the university where we graduated from the American University of Beirut is that during our first summer, they take the architecture class and they go and they survey a certain building or a certain neighborhood inside the city. So every generation had to survey an entire neighborhood around Beirut or around Lebanon, and this was very helpful because all these heritage buildings that we already have, no one has documented them. No one took the time to draw their details, to recreate the tiles in paper and on digital media. So this is something that is very good that was happening throughout the years. And suddenly, 2 years ago, we were commissioned to do an exhibition from the book of Robert Saliba, who was actually collecting all this information and trying to explain it, trying to explain the different eras and the different periods from 1840 till 1940 about all these heritage buildings. How were they planned? How did the city evolve in its urban fabric, whether it was from very rural and agricultural, and how this slowly turned into spaces that had central halls, that had different planning throughout the different years, especially when concrete was introduced into the city, and the building of these heritage sites and these heritage buildings was completely different throughout time.
Yeah, with the French influence, specifically like when we started seeing stories. So we have buildings in Beirut, 4 stories, 5 stories. That was kind of very interesting in the shift of architecture styles. We even worked on a project that deals with a composite building, which is half Ottoman, half French, and you can see exactly where it became French somehow, with a bit of ornamentation, with the 2 last floors that were added above it. So yeah, the city in itself, when you walk in it, somehow, if you look closely, it tells you that story. So that's why we really are always conscious to fight hard for such buildings, knowing that real estate rules in Lebanon. Even if you have a building that's under building law or a code that's classified, it doesn't matter even anymore if you have the power and money. So, and also I'm going to tell you a fun story about how these buildings are usually destructed. So they used to plant next to them a caoutchouc tree, the rubber tree. And the rubber tree is known to grow massively, and that its roots also grow massively underground.
Right.
So you used to place them next to all these houses so that the roots kind of destroy the foundation of the house. So when they come, they're like, oh, sorry, like it just happened naturally that this house needs to be knocked down. And yeah, so like it's kind of, like it's a creative way to put it, but yeah, that's.
But
Right, and I think there's there's the importance of documenting those heritage sites, and then of course there's the importance of saving them, right? Trying your best to really save them in one way or another. And that was something I always have this question as to, you know, why were we not taught about these 2 very important acts in architecture school? I mean, you know, you're saying that at the American University of Beirut, you were sort of asked to look at these topics. I wasn't personally, however, I think, you know, it's as important as knowing the history of architecture in the rest of the world. It's really understanding and appreciating the history of the place that you're studying in, the place that you're from, the place that you're living in, etc. As you move on in life and move from one country to another, it's that appreciation of not only the political history, the social history, etc., but the architectural history as well. But I think we were a group of architects that came back to Doha early, I would say late 2000s, so 2008, 2009. And it was also a group of us that started working at Qatar Museums, right? And I think it was a very interesting moment because at Qatar Museums, there was this department that looked after architectural heritage. And going to their floor and just looking at everything on the walls in terms of drawings, panoramic images, etc., it was architectural heritage was anything that was built before the introduction of cement and concrete, right? Everything that was built with hasa, teen, like mud and stone and palm fronds, etc. So that was architectural heritage, and there was a lot of focus on that, on how to preserve those sites, how to renovate them if needed, how to, you know, protect them, etc. Great job done there. But of course, we were coming in with more questions, as in the buildings from our childhood, right? The sports clubs we used to go to, the hotels, the libraries, the National Theatre, etc. Like what's happening with those? We're starting to see them being demolished one after the other, and especially if they were on sort of prime locations along the Corniche, prime locations along the water, and in places where, you know, new developments were to come to. And we really questioned that, and we went to the team at the architectural heritage department, and we asked them, and they were like, "La la la, هاي مش حصى وطين." Like that was the answer to everything. They would look at a picture and they would be like, "It's so obvious, it's not stone and mud, right? So why are we even considering? Why are we even having conversation about this building?" And so it was really the beginning of something very important that had to happen in Qatar, where we had to challenge that understanding, and we had to challenge that sort of also categorization of architectural heritage. And we found the heritage law, and in the heritage law, it said that any building that was 40 years or older would have to, number one, before demolition, well, would have to be listed. And then number two, before demolition, would have to come through a sort of a committee in the architectural heritage department to get approvals for demolition. So we straight away sort of wanted to use this law as well, because very quickly, many of those buildings that we were advocating for would become 40 years or older. And that's really how we started. We sort of took the higher management of Qatar museums to different buildings, whether it's the fire station. I'm not sure if any of you have been to the fire station in Qatar, but when we went to the fire station, there was there were spray painted crosses all over the building because this building was going to be demolished. And we really tried to sort of, through presentations, through using references of other buildings, you know, all around the world and the region, but also globally, of repurposing of sort of this modern architectural heritage era, or buildings from this era, and how it could be successful. And I must also, you've mentioned George Arbid. I must mention that George has not only been, you know, a great mentor to me, but I think he also helped raise awareness for the understanding of the importance of such an important era in architecture in the Arab world, whether it was through, you know, the work that he's been doing through the publications that he's been working on, but also I remember the Bahrain pavilion he worked on in Venice. And I mean, you know his work more, or you know, of his years more at the American University of Beirut as well. But I keep going back to George, back to, you know, now he's moved again, but I keep going back to him. I was with him this summer, and I update him on what we're doing in Doha, or what we're able to do, and telling him, you know, about the challenges, but also about just the potential opportunities that I still see in the horizon, because of being able to save more buildings, or sort of not only save them and hoard them and, you know, leave them there, but also repurpose them. And Liwan is one of them, actually. Liwan has a beautiful story. I know I've already been speaking a lot, but I would love to say more about Liwan. Liwan is in an area of Doha, very central, prime location. Real estate was sort of eyeing this district in Doha, and a real estate company, Mashera Properties, was able to sort of take over the most central part of district of Doha, right? And it did that with a sort of goal of regenerating the center of Doha, bringing families back, bringing people back to the center of Doha, upgrading it so that, you know, it can host more people can live there, more people can operate there in terms of shops, F&Bs, cafes, so that it's a more vibrant center of the city. And the condition of the buildings there did not allow, I mean, for the whole district to be sort of preserved. Mashera Properties was able to preserve a few buildings and not many, right? The rest of it was sort of, went through a compulsory purchase from the original owners, demolished, huge basements dug down because of the superstructure that's under Msherab, the district now. And then, of course, many architectural firms entered competitions, design competitions, the master plan itself. It was a mega project. Today it's complete and today it's open. However, the neighboring districts were also prone to a similar situation, right? And Liwan is in the very next district, right after Msherab. And there was major fear of that district going through the same cycle. Not saying Msherab was not good. Msherab had its advantages as well, but there continue to be questions as to, could it have happened differently? Could more have been saved in Msherab, right? So Liwan, the school building itself, first girls' school building in Qatar, beautiful, modest and simple architecture of the time. However, when it was built at the time, it was a major sort of, accomplishment in terms of its architecture and construction. But the building was taken over by Qatar Museums from the Ministry of Environment at the time in order to protect it from demolition. However, Qatar Museums did not sort of move in with the program straight away. What actually happened was Msherab Properties rented the school building, and it rented it in order to host a program of collecting found objects from Msherab. So before any building would be demolished in Msherab, any found objects would be collected and taken to Liwan, to the school building, right? And then Ben Barber, Khalifa Al-Abedi, and the team there were curators, basically, and artists that were categorizing all the found objects into different classrooms. So one classroom was more about photographs that were found in all the studios, all the photography studios of Msherab. Another room was about the books and the notebooks and everything educational or related to education that were found in the schools. Another one was, I remember, about just clothes and tailoring, because of all those tailors that were in Msherab before it was demolished. And so it became an archival sort of hub for Msherab, which I thought was, at least that was done as well. And eventually Msherab was completed as a project. Its museums opened, and this collection moved into the storages of Msherab, and part of the collection is shown in one of the museums in Msherab that tells the story of Msherab and what it used to be before it turned into a real estate sort of urban regeneration project. And today, Liwan is a site for, studios, for designers, for artists that also, interestingly, many of them are looking at archiving. There's the project of Al Mafyar Heritage Site there, which is a site to conserve and renovate a heritage site. So it's Liwan in itself is another one of those interesting projects that we were able to save, but also its programming is very much the legacy of this architectural heritage gem, which are, and each one, I can give a lot of examples of those buildings that I keep going back to George Arbid to show and tell and ask for advice about. And I think it's where it was very challenging in the beginning, but we're just seeing now that it's becoming more and more trendy.
Mm-hmm.
And the word trend is important in the time we live in now. It's become trendy to find those modern structures, whether you're in the public sector or even in the private sector.
I believe we are fine with the trend, if it actually is.
Yeah, of course.
But the idea of saving heritage or saving architecture through activation, I believe is super important, and it's something that we don't really touch upon. And this is what Ghaith was mentioning before. When we started, when we had our first studio, it was in 20th century old Lebanese villa in the center of the city in Zaq al-Blat. And this project was started by Ghassan Maasri and Sandra Ishe, who took this house, which was completely abandoned, from the owner, Imad Fawaz. this project was really a seed of an experiment that no one really understood what it was. They took this space and they wanted to activate it. And that was the deal. Instead of the house being abandoned and completely destroyed with time, we would activate it and we would take care of its infrastructure and we would activate it in terms of culture and people and community. So when we were part of the first people that actually were in the space, and suddenly we started to collect a community of different individuals from different fields and from different backgrounds, and that was the base of Mansion. The values of Mansion were to find people that needed space to be in the city and that worked somehow for the space and for the city. And we were architects there, but you had urban designers, urbanists, sociologists, curators, artists, actors, writers. It was quite the big array of people and professions, and over 10 years we ran the space all together. So everybody was involved in actually turning the space into a space that's completely open to the public and activated through us being there.
Yeah, like to pick up on what Jad said, basically what's interesting about Mansion, which we called Mansion at one point, is that activation came before renovation. And that is not very common with how people preserve things, because we have many old houses that are turned into the most kind of alienating experience, even if they're still old. So in Mansion, we went into activation, and with time, we made it a space of production, whether it's a library where people came. And also what was important is there were different age groups. So people at Mansion varied from the age of 3 till the age of 16. And that was a kind of a mini community. And that's when we started feeling that everyone takes a role in the house to maintain it, to keep it open as much as possible, to host events to people who cannot create an event for themselves, don't have the space, don't have the money, don't have any means to showcase what they can do. And that was the important part of Mansion and why we were dedicated to it. Even after the explosion happened, part of Mansion collapsed, like the corner. And this is also a heritage building we're talking about. So we got funding from Prince Claus. They already, and what's the funny part is we didn't even ask for funding. Prince Claus noticed what happened in Lebanon, and they know the Mansion project from before. So they directly sent us asking what went wrong, how can we help? And we documented the damage, and they sent the money, and Jad and I basically took the initiative to rebuild part of the corner of it so that we maintain it. And that's the interesting part about adaptive reuse, or kind of maintaining heritage site. As Jad said, activation is the core. Before any finishing, before any architectural material, it's how as people we deal with it or work around it. And also like the fragility of a situation around you. At one point, 3 years back, we worked with Dr. Salman Abu Sitta from Palestine, where he maintained all the maps of Gaza and of West Bank since years, and he have a big database in London. But he decided that the American University in Beirut is the safest place to put all this archive in, knowing the situation in Palestine. And that is also something interesting, where an archive of another country inhabits another place for the situation around it. So suddenly we were dealing with archives of Palestinian aerial views, aerial maps that are stored at AUB, which is maybe like now is not the best place, Beirut, to be, to have a safe things. But yeah, in general, like this borrowing things, maybe that's also an idea of how we document archives in the region between all of us, by also displacing it a bit and kind of like sharing it with other people, getting it to be exposed and known.
What Ghaith is mentioning is we worked on the inauguration of the Palestinian Land Studies Center back in 2019, and it was part of AUB's ongoing commitment to preserve, for preservation, reclamation, and dissemination of Palestinian history. So this was something that we were working on as the exhibition to showcase that archive. The archive is, in general, archives are very important. They're very important to like the academics and the scholars, but there's always that moment where you want to translate it to the general public, where we take this and we showcase it to everyone. So in the inauguration of the Palestinian Land Studies Center, it was all 2D screens that are showing different maps, very interactive, that showed the displacement of people, that showed what could be an action plan towards the return, what showed the historic mapping and the urban morphology components of each area. So it was quite the journey between different years of that land. And even with that, going back to Beirut, for example, when we were working on the residential architecture of Beirut from the book that Robert Saliba produced, there was a moment where this is an exhibition now that we're designing. How can we translate it to the public? So we took all these surveyed buildings, basically buildings that have been measured and redrawn in 2D to show exactly how the building facades look, how the plans look. And these were things that the public wouldn't necessarily understand. And we didn't want to focus on the architects and the urban designers of the city. They know this information. So we printed out all of this surveyed material, and we actually created 3D models of parts of these buildings, so that when the public passes and looks at the ironwork of a certain building, or the embellishments that were there from the Ottoman period or from the French mandate, you can see the intricacy of the work. And this was something that was very attractive to the public, where they stood, they understood the buildings, and then they went into more in-depth discussions within the exhibition about how these buildings came about and how to preserve them. And somehow they understood the importance of heritage, which was something, as you said, was not in the people's minds, and they wouldn't understand, why should I keep this piece of architecture in my city?
Even in this project, the context was very important. Because we're showcasing archival material, we insisted that the project should be outdoors. And this is something Jad and I, we've been a bit known for through the past years, that we always do outdoor exhibitions / pavilions. And to us, it's very important, because when you think of an archive, you think of an air-conditioned place which nobody could reach to. And for us, having this pavilion in the middle of the city, and where people can randomly stumble upon it and see it, was also contributed to it's like to spread it even further. And the exhibition we did this year, like in the spring, about the emergence of product design in Lebanon, because it was never documented before how object design came to happen. And you were mentioning, Fatma, something about this model that was a bit dusty that you saw. Literally, the whole historical part, which is now sitting in the museum in Switzerland, in Lausanne, was found in the trash, if you believe it or not. We were literally looking into buildings with the curator. Some chairs, some old prototypes of things were literally found, some in the trash, some in a random attic, some and then they were cleaned, they were tried to kind of put them together. And then when we displayed them in the museum in Switzerland, you look at it with all the hand drawings and you're like, wow, now I get how object design happened in Lebanon. We needed to kind of scavenge it ourselves, because there's no proper archiving for it. So for us architects, the three of us, I imagine, in any project we do, naturally archiving, whether we think of it or not, even if it's not the objective at one point, it's a tool. It's a medium that we're going to go through anyway for us to reach somewhere. And that is now in our recent works as well, something we are working on. We integrate many parts of the team in the research part of the project, so that we all kind of get the main kind of mission, or the main objective of what we are presenting.
I think what's so interesting is that there is no sort of dead end to this, right? You can just continue from one scale to another. And like you said, whether it's from architecture to product design, but what we're looking at now. So I mentioned Atlas Bookstore. We founded Atlas Bookstore back in 2015, and we had it in a project space at the Sheraton Hotel, in itself a modernist structure that, or a modernist building that we loved since we were kids, and there was always a bookstore there. So it was so nice for us to go back with a bookstore to that hotel. But our focus was always on the architecture and urbanism of the region, right? And we were, yeah, it was the cities and it was the buildings, and that was our focus. So it was any book, any publication, any magazine, any sort of thesis that would reference the architecture and urbanism of the region. But more recently, now we're working on, we're very soon, in a few months, moving to a new space for the bookstore. And so we have all the books, we're looking through the books, and we've noticed that, you know, we haven't stopped collecting, we haven't stopped growing the collection of books, because we not only sell books at the bookstore, we also act as a small library, right? Where we have books on display that can go on loan, etc. But what we've realized is that since the pandemic, my sister, when I say we, it's my sister and I, our interests in the land has grown beyond architecture, beyond real estate on the land, but the land itself and the origins of the land itself, and the ecology of, it started with the ecology of Qatar. And the realization also of the lack of documentation there, and the lack of understanding, the lack of knowledge there, and the lack of people talking about it as well. And so naturally, we started looking at what has been published about that, and then eventually what has been published about the ecology of the region, looking back at traditional knowledge, which was very important as well. And that has become, I wouldn't say a new genre, but also an extension from looking at, you know, archiving and preserving architecture to now looking at space beyond architecture, because it was space before architecture. It was the space before architecture, right? And understanding how we could bring to the public that knowledge as well. So, you know, again, you're talking about product design, there's landscape designs, there's the gardens. And so not only looking at traditional knowledge and of what used to be there on the land, but then also what happened during the 60s, 70s, 80s, when all of these buildings of interest to us were built, but what happened to the landscapes around them, and garden design, and how that evolved, and how that transitioned, and what it is today, and how is it different today from just a few decades ago. So there is a lot of sort of a lot that we can go into from the starting point of, you know, whether it's activating a heritage space or finding an archive or displaying an archive and exhibiting it. There's so much more that I think we can get into, and fortunately we see more and more people being interested in such practices and such exercises.
Definitely. Like, I think we as architects have the responsibility now to always like do such conversations like the one we're doing, and to kind of actively be conscious about the history of where we live, or like what we're dealing with. But from the experience we had at Mansion, I realized that even architects on their own can reach to a specific level. It's only with collaboration with different people who are lawmakers, people who know about law, people who like, this is when you can collaborate somehow, and your proposals of activation or building on something is backed up by things that can actually go through. Not only like a nice ideal project in your mind, no, you have all the ingredients that you can fight for, and you can actually proceed and save it. So I think we should encourage like more interdisciplinary kind of model of working, so that, yeah, so that we can really go through this together.
But Fatma, also in reference to what you were saying, the array of things that we can dive into stemming from archiving and heritage are vast. And there's always one thing that we've dealt with recently, which was how to archive the experience and how to archive that activation, like understanding how this space and this activity affected this space. So after 10 years of mansion running in Beirut, it had to close. The owner wanted the building back, the house back. So there was okay, what have we done to this space over the 10 years, but also what happened in the space? What is the story that the space actually, what is the value that it held culturally and socially? And whether it was different things that were happening in the city. Activism was a very solid entity within the space. So there was like the Daily Project. There was different municipality elections that really were pushed to a different into a different perspective through this space where people were talking, we're gathering, we're having these conversations in this like Liwan, you can say, that can host all of these talks. So for us, there's also that level of archiving the experience, which was very difficult for us to explain. Why is this an important thing? How can we activate a space and then renovate it? How can this be a slow, organic way of dealing with heritage sites instead of demolishing them or completely renovating them? So it was a journey of understanding all of these components, as you were saying, whether it is something that has to do with their history or their future.
No, I'm so happy I'm so happy Liwan and Sudi Safar brought us together.
Yes,
there's so much more to discuss, right?
Sure, in person, hopefully.
Yes,
Whenever
for
you come
sure.
to Beirut or to Europe, let us know.
For sure. No, Beirut is always, I mean, a place I love to go back to, so much to learn from. And you see it in front of you, right? All the acts of the importance of archiving, preserving in Beirut. Such a
Nice.
beautiful place. I hope we get to meet there, if not
Yes,
in Doha,
pleasure.
or as you said, in Europe.
Definitely.
Cool. Really nice talking to you, Fatma.
Same, Jad and Ghaith. We'll be in touch.